most powerful weapon of Egypt's greatest pharaoh was not his army, it was his story. For over 3,000 years, the official account of Ramesses the Great's heroic victory at the Battle of Kadesh has been the accepted history. It was a story carved into temple walls across Egypt, presented as an undeniable fact for all to see. But deep within those glorious stone carvings are clues to a different version of events. It is a story of near disaster, a terrible mistake, and the birth of the most effective public relations campaign of the ancient world. This is the story of how that military failure was spun into a legend. It is also the story of how the pharaoh's own mummy, thousands of years after his death, revealed a final, human secret that challenged the divine image he had so carefully constructed for himself. The rise of a warrior dynasty. The journey for a man to become a living god starts not with a crown, but with a sword. The world of the 13th century BCE was a landscape of giants. To the north, in the highlands of what is now modern-day Turkey, the Hittite Empire forged iron and commanded huge armies. They were a tough, warlike people. To the south, along the green ribbon of the Nile River, Egypt stood as a beacon of gold, grain, and ancient power. The two empires were like superpowers, always watching each other, waiting for a sign of weakness. The family Ramses was born into, the 19th dynasty, was new and hungry for power. It was founded by his grandfather, a common soldier named Ramesses II. He was not born royal. He was a career military man who rose through the ranks to become the vizier, the pharaoh's second in command. Through smart political moves, he took the throne for himself, changing his name to Ramesses I. He started a new line of pharaohs, one built on military strength, not on ancient royal blood. This was a family of soldiers. They did not have the long, divine family tree of the pharaohs from older dynasties. Their right to rule came from their ability to lead armies and project an image of unbreakable strength. Ramesses I's son, Seti I, understood this completely. Seti was a true warrior king. He spent most of his time as pharaoh on military campaigns, marching his armies into the lands of Syria and the Levant. He was taking back territories and influence that Egypt had lost during the strange and chaotic time of the pharaoh Akhenaten, who had tried to change Egypt's entire religion. Seti was a restorer. He made the nation stable again, filled its treasury with wealth from conquered lands, and made Egypt a top military power once more. His building projects were impressive, but his greatest project was his own son, the young Ramses. The boy Ramses was not kept safe and sheltered in a palace. He was shaped by the rough world of soldiers and war. From an age when most children are learning to play games, he was learning the art of battle. He was given titles like Commander-in-Chief of the Army while he was still just a boy. This was not just for show. He went with his father Seti on long and difficult military campaigns into Syria and Libya. He learned military strategy, not from reading scrolls, but from the dust and chaos of a real battlefield. He saw with his own eyes the massive effort it took to supply thousands of soldiers with food and water in a dry desert. He witnessed the brutal reality of attacking a walled city. He learned the tricky game of dealing with local kings who might be an ally one day and an enemy the next. He learned how to read the complicated network of loyalties between the small city-states in Canaan. And he learned how to project an aura of divine power to scare a rebellious town into surrendering without a fight. By the time he was 10 years old, he was officially named as his father's co-regent. This meant he was ruling alongside his father. It was a clear and public message to all of Egypt. This boy would be king. His name and his image started to appear on temple walls next to his father's, sharing the divine power of the pharaoh. It was a very smart political move by Seti. It made sure that when he died, the power would pass to his son smoothly. It also wove his son into the religious and political life of Egypt long before he would rule alone. This was no easy training. It was a tough, decade-long education in how to use absolute power. So when Seti I died in the year 1279 BCE, a young man, probably in his early 20s, took the throne in Egypt. But he was no beginner. He was Ramesses II, a man who already had the military experience and political cleverness of a leader twice his age. He inherited a stable kingdom, a powerful and experienced army that was loyal to his family, and one giant, unsolved problem that waited for him on the northern horizon. He inherited the Hittite problem, and to solve it, he would decide to risk everything he had. The road to Kadesh. With the throne of Egypt now his, the young pharaoh needed to prove his greatness. How could he do more than his own famous warrior father? He needed an enemy. He needed a challenge so big that winning would make him a living legend. The Hittite Empire was that enemy. They were the other superpower of the age, a true match for Egypt. Their control of iron meant they had stronger and better weapons. Their skill with war chariots was famous across the ancient world. There was a key difference between the two armies' main weapons. Egyptian chariots were built for speed. They were light, carrying a driver and an archer. They were like fast-moving platforms for firing arrows, designed to harass the enemy from a distance. The Hittite chariot, however, was a heavier machine. It was built for shock and to smash through enemy lines. It carried a crew of 3, a driver, a shield bearer to protect the crew, and a spearman for close-up fighting. A charge of thousands of these heavy chariots was like a wave of ancient tanks, meant to break infantry formations and cause widespread panic. For decades, Egypt and the Hittites had been locked in a tense standoff. It was like a great game, with both sides fighting for control over the important trade routes and the buffer states located in Syria. The key to winning this game, the prize that both empires wanted above all else, was a single, heavily defended city on the Orontes River. This was a center for trade, a fortress of military power, and a symbol of who controlled the region. Its name would become forever linked with Ramesses, the city of Kadesh. For years, Kadesh had been a forward base for the Hittites, refusing to bow to Egyptian power. For Ramesses, taking Kadesh became more than just a military goal. It became an obsession. It would be the greatest victory of his young reign. It would be a win so big, it would prove he was better than his father, and announce to the world that a new, greater pharaoh now ruled the land of the Nile. In the 5th year of his reign, he decided the time for waiting was over. He gathered one of the largest armies Egypt had ever put together. It was a huge force of about 20,000 men and 2,000 chariots. This army was split into 4 large divisions. Each division was named after one of the main gods of the Egyptian state. The Amun division, which Ramesses led himself, the Ra division, the Ptah division, and the Set division. This was more than just an army. It was a mobile city, a moving symbol of Egypt's power and ability to organize. The work to get ready was massive. Food stores were filled, thousands of weapons were made, and the entire country was prepared for a glorious war. Ramesses was marching north to claim his destiny. He was completely unaware that his enemy was not just waiting for him, but was luring him into a perfectly designed trap. The Great Deception and the Trap. The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, was an experienced and brilliant military leader. He watched the Egyptian army advance from his capital city, not with fear, but with cold, careful planning. He knew his own territory. He knew the bends of the Orontes River and the hills that could hide an entire army. More importantly, he knew the mind of his young, ambitious opponent. As Ramesses and his 4 giant divisions marched into Syria, Muwatalli gathered his own huge force. He called upon his allies and the kings who served him, putting together a massive army of nearly 40,000 men and over 3,000 heavy chariots. Then he did something incredible. He made his entire army disappear. He hid them behind the high defensive mound, known as a tell of the city of Kadesh. He used the city itself as a giant shield. The largest army in the Near East was lying in wait, completely invisible to the approaching Egyptians. But hiding the army was only half of the plan. To make the trap work, Muwatalli needed to fool Ramesses directly. He needed to play on the young pharaoh's pride. He sent 2 local nomads, men from the Shasu tribe, to be captured by the Egyptian scouts. These men were not simple shepherds. They were agents of Hittite military intelligence. They were brought before the pharaoh himself, and they played their part perfectly. They said they wanted to leave the Hittite king and serve the magnificent pharaoh of Egypt. Then they delivered the crucial false information. They told Ramesses that the Hittite army was terrified of him. They claimed that King Muwatalli had seen the massive Egyptian army coming and had retreated in fear. They said he had pulled his forces far to the north, to a city near Aleppo, over 100 miles away. It was exactly what the supremely confident young Ramesses wanted to believe. The story confirmed his own ideas about his greatness and the favor of the gods. Even though his own scouts had reported seeing signs of enemy soldiers closer to Kadesh, he chose to believe the story of the 2 captured agents. Their lie was more comforting than the uncertain truth. This moment of believing what he wanted to be true would lead him to make a huge, almost deadly mistake. Believing the enemy was far away and that Kadesh was his for the taking, he became reckless. Speed, not safety, became his main goal. He broke his army's careful marching formation. Wanting to grab the city and claim his victory quickly, he pushed ahead, racing forward with only his lead division, the Amun, and his personal bodyguards. The Ra division followed behind him, but the Ptah and Set divisions were now miles and miles behind. stretched out in a long unprotected line. Ramesses, believing he was about to win the easiest and most glorious victory of his life, had personally led the best of his army directly into a killing zone. The battle, disaster, and desperate survival. As the Amun division began to set up its camp for the night, just northwest of Kadesh, the ground began to shake. The air filled with a low, growing rumble. From their hiding place to the east of the city, 2,500 Hittite heavy chariots stormed across the plain. This was not a small attack or a skirmish. It was a perfectly timed, overwhelming, and disastrous assault. They didn't attack Ramesses' camp directly. Instead, they charged across the Orontes River and smashed with terrifying force into the side of the 2nd Egyptian Division, the Ra Division. The Ra Division was still on the march, completely unprepared for an attack. The impact was a total disaster. The lighter Egyptian chariots were flipped over and shattered into pieces. The foot soldiers, with no protection, were trampled and cut down in huge numbers. The Ra Division, a full quarter of Ramesses' entire army, broke apart in sheer panic in just a matter of minutes. It was a complete rout. The survivors, wounded and screaming in terror, dropped their weapons and abandoned all discipline. They fled north in a wave of fear, running directly towards Ramesses' own camp. They brought with them not a warning, but the Hittite army itself. Before the Amun division could even form a proper defensive line, the Hittite chariot force, having destroyed the Ra division, wheeled around and crashed into the southern side of the pharaoh's camp. The carefully laid out camp, with its royal tent and the sacred shrine to the god Amun, became a slaughterhouse. Tents were ripped from the ground. Soldiers who were busy with simple camp duties were cut down where they stood. The disciplined order of the Egyptian army, the pride of the nation, dissolved into a scene of total chaos, filled with blood, dust, and terror. Ramesses was trapped. He was completely surrounded. He had no way to communicate with the rest of his army. His most elite division was in chaos, and the main Hittite infantry force was now starting to cross the river to deliver the final blow. In that moment, he was not Ramesses the Great, the chosen of the gods. He was a cornered king who had been completely outsmarted by his enemy. He was facing certain death, or the ultimate shame of being captured. His grand ambition, his quest to be greater than his father, his very rule as pharaoh, was about to be ended in a single disastrous afternoon that he had caused himself. It is here, at the absolute lowest point of his life, with failure and death staring him in the face, that this story takes a turn. Here, he would create his most powerful weapon. According to the official story, an epic story that Ramesses would spend the rest of his life carving into every temple he could. He did not give up. Facing total destruction, he turned to his personal god Amun and said a desperate, passionate prayer. He cried out that his god had seemingly left him alone, but he promised his faith was still strong. He reminded Amun of the countless offerings and magnificent temples he had built in his honor. Then, as the stone inscriptions tell it, Amun heard his prayer. A divine power surged through the pharaoh. He became in that moment something more than a man. He became like the storm god Baal in his fury. He single-handedly got into his great war chariot, named Victory in Thebes, and charged directly into the enemy. The temple reliefs at Abu Simbel and Karnak show him as a giant figure. His chariot rolls over a sea of fallen, broken enemies. His bow is pulled back, and his arrows, guided by the gods, strike down Hittite nobles and warriors. The story claims he personally charged the circle of 2,500 enemy chariots not once, but 6 separate times. He cut his way through the Hittite army as if it were nothing. In his own telling, he was a one-man army who single-handedly saved Egypt. What was the reality of that desperate moment? The historical truth is likely less magical, but no less dramatic. Ramesses, as a trained warrior, certainly fought with the fierce courage of a cornered leader. His personal bravery was likely inspiring, but his actions alone would not have been enough to win against such a huge force. The battle truly turned on a stroke of luck, the unexpected arrival of a separate Egyptian military force. This group, known as the Niaran, were not part of the 4 main divisions. They had been moving up the coast on a separate mission and were drawn to the battle by the noise. They arrived from the north, completely unseen by the Hittites, and smashed into the back of the Hittite chariot force. By this point, the Hittite attack had become disorganized. Many of their soldiers, believing they had already won, had stopped to steal the riches from the Egyptian camp. They were caught completely by surprise, trapped between the pharaoh's desperate counterattack from inside the camp and the fresh attack of the Niaran from outside. The Hittites were thrown into confusion. Their attack was broken. They were driven back towards the Orontes River, and many of them drowned as they tried to escape. The battle raged until evening. It ended not in a glorious Egyptian victory, but in a bloody, brutal stalemate. Ramses had saved himself and what was left of his army from being destroyed, but it was a victory that cost so much, it was almost like a loss. He had lost thousands of men, 2 of his divisions were shattered, and most importantly, Kadesh was still in Hittite hands. By any real military measure, the campaign was a strategic failure, born from the pharaoh's own pride and recklessness. The propaganda victory. But Ramses understood a deeper truth about power. The person who controls the story controls reality. He returned to Egypt not as a humbled leader, but as the great hero of a new, God-approved epic. He immediately ordered this story on his personal God-powered victory at Kadesh to be carved on a massive scale. At Abu Simbel, at Karnak, at Luxor, and at Abydos. And at his own burial temple, the Ramesses, everywhere that Egyptians gathered, they would see the giant image of their pharaoh. The story showed him abandoned by his own men, but saved by his faith, single-handedly defeating the enemies of Egypt. He did not just report on the battle, he completely rewrote its meaning. He had turned a military blunder into the ultimate proof of his special relationship with the gods. It showed he was no ordinary king. He was their chosen hero on earth. It was the most ambitious and effective public relations campaign the world had ever seen. From warrior to statesman and master builder. This control of the story would define the rest of his incredibly long reign. He realized that endless war with the Hittites was a costly stalemate that neither side could truly win. So he changed his approach from warrior to statesman. The years after Kadesh were marked by smaller fights, but also by a growing number of letters between the 2 great kings. 16 years after the bloody battle at Kadesh, Ramses and the new Hittite king Hattusili III did the unthinkable. They negotiated and signed the world's first known international peace treaty. A copy of this treaty is now displayed at the United Nations building in New York. This amazing document was a treaty between equals. They promised to have perpetual peace. They created a mutual defense pact, agreeing to help each other if an outsider attacked. They even included rules for returning political refugees who had fled from one kingdom to the other. To seal this new era of peace and diplomacy, Ramses married a Hittite princess, making her one of his great royal wives. The great hero of Kadesh had now cleverly transformed himself into the wise creator of international peace. With his northern border now safe, he unleashed a building ambition that would make all previous pharaohs look small. His reign became an explosion of construction, a nationwide project to remake Egypt in his own image. His building projects were not just temples. He created the Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak, a breathtaking forest of 134 giant stone columns. At his burial temple, the Ramesses, he ordered a single granite statue of himself that weighed over 1,000 tons, one of the heaviest statues ever carved. He built an entirely new capital city in the Nile Delta called Ramesses, a huge city of palaces, temples, and army barracks. He did not just create new monuments. He aggressively took over old ones. He often had the special ovals with the names of previous pharaohs called cartouches erased from their own statues and buildings. He then had his own name carved in their place. In his view, all of Egypt's long history had simply been a setup for his own magnificent reign. He lived to be over 90 years old, ruling for 66 years. This staggering length of time brought peace and stability to Egypt. His long life itself became part of his legend. He outlived at least 12 of his own sons. His personal life was as grand as his public one. He had many wives, but his great love was his first great royal wife, Nefertari. The tomb he built for her in the Valley of the Queens is perhaps the most beautiful in all of Egypt. Its colorful, perfectly preserved paintings are a timeless monument to his love for her. In total, he fathered over 100 children, filling the royal court and the priesthood with his own family for generations to come. Final secrets of the mummy. After a life spent building a divine image, what final human truths would his own body reveal? His journey was not over at his death. He was mummified with all the skill of the age and buried in a magnificent tomb in the Valley of the Kings. But the chaos of later times meant his tomb was robbed by ancient treasure hunters. To protect his body, ancient priests moved his mummy, along with those of other great pharaohs, to a secret royal hiding place at a site called Deir al-Bahri. There he lay, hidden and forgotten, for nearly 3,000 years. His rediscovery in 1881 was one of the most exciting moments in the history of archaeology. the world could now look upon the actual face of Ramesses the Great. Scientific study of his mummy revealed the human reality behind the divine image. He was an old man when he died, suffering from severe arthritis that would have bent his back and made walking a painful, stooped effort. His teeth were worn down to the gums and full of painful abscesses, and wrapped within his bandages was a final, undeniable truth: the evidence of a healed battle wound on his shoulder. The God King was, after all, a mortal man who had suffered, aged, and bled. His final journey came in 1976. His ancient body was deteriorating due to a fungal infection. To save it, his mummy was flown to Paris for special treatment. To travel legally, the Egyptian government issued his royal mummy an official passport. His occupation was listed with perfect, simple accuracy: king, deceased.